hello to all the listeners out there. Thank you for tuning in. The presentation, it may or may not take the whole 45 minutes, just to give you an idea. Plus, when it comes to the question time, feel free to ask me questions about diabetes in general or nutrition in general. You don't have to stick with just the sodium topic. So I'd like to begin tonight's story with that of Cap O'Rushes. In the old English fairy tale, Cap O'Rushes, there are 3 daughters. Their father wants to see how fond they are of him. So he says to the first, "How much do you love me, my dear?" "Why," says she, "as I love my life." "That's good," says he. So he says to the second, "How much do you love me, my dear?" "Why," says she, "better than all the world." "That's good," says he. So he says to the third daughter, "How much do you love me, my dear?" "Why, I love you as fresh meat loves salt," says she. Well, he was very angry. "You don't love me at all," says he, "and in my house you stay no more." So he drove her out there and then and shut the door in her face. The story goes on to tell how eventually the father was in the position of having to eat some unsalted meat, and he realized how much the daughter did indeed love him. A happy reunion occurred. In the Muslim religion, Allah is said to have bestowed 4 blessings from the sky: iron, fire, water, and salt. And the Prophet Muhammad said, "Salt is the master of your food." In the days of ancient Greece, Homer referred to salt as a divine substance. Thus, in these situations, salt is highly prized. I think it was a good time to be salt. And yet, in the book of Genesis, it was not a good time to be salt. When the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were being reduced to rubble by fire and brimstone, Lot's wife turned back to look at the destruction. She was turned into a pillar of salt.
Eva Villeneuve.
My point is, salt plays quite a role in our history. Salt is today common in everyday language. Have you ever said any of these expressions? I am sure I have used them all from time to time. What is salt? Salt is made of 2 elements, sodium and chloride, and it is a naturally occurring mineral. Animals, including ourselves, depend upon salt, for both sodium and chloride have many roles in the human body. These include
The conference is in lecture mode.
These include transmitting nerve impulses, maintaining fluid balance, and chloride is of major importance for food digestion, as it is one of the main ingredients in hydrochloric acid.
Eva Villeneuve.
Recognizing the importance of salt in sustaining life, people have been mining or otherwise obtaining salt for thousands of years. The earliest known salt works in the world is in Romania, and this site dates back to 6,000 years BC. So indeed, both sodium and chloride are essential for health, and there are specific requirements for each. I am now going to focus on sodium for many reasons, as you will see. Here are the requirements for sodium as determined by the National Academy of Science Institute of Nutrition. Take a moment to locate your age to see what is your acceptable intake and your upper limit. Just do note the 4th line down. I've got an error there. It's 9 to 50. That should say 14 to 50 years. So find your age on there and you can locate your acceptable intake and upper limit. The acceptable intake is an amount that is about right for most people in that category, although it is different from the absolute minimum that we need for health. For humans, About 500 milligrams of sodium is the minimum we need to run our bodies healthfully. On the other hand is the upper limit. This is an amount that is advisable not to exceed, for ill health can occur at levels beyond the upper limit. In comparison to the amount we need for health is the amount we actually consume. A typical North American consumes about milligrams of sodium every day, and just about every Canadian eats much more sodium than their basic needs. Specifically, it's estimated that an average Canadian man consumes about 4,200 milligrams of sodium every day, and a woman about 3,300 milligrams. Perhaps particularly troubling, and especially to me, I have kids, is that 97% of kids and teens eat much more sodium than they need. Why is this the case? The overriding factor in Canadian sodium intake is the amount of salt and other sodium-containing compounds that are added to food. Note that added salt accounts for about 90% of the sodium added to our foods, and other sodium-containing compounds, things like baking soda, baking powder, sodium nitrite, sodium benzoate, and other things of that nature, contribute about 10%. So compare that 75% of the sodium we eat is in prepared foods, and most of that sodium is from added salt. Salt and other sources of sodium we add at home, so even when you're salting your cooking or putting some salt on your eggs at breakfast, that adds a mere 15% of our total daily sodium intake, and naturally occurring sodium is only 10% of what we eat. Okay. Why is this a problem? The main concern is that blood pressure rises progressively with sodium intake. The fancy way of saying this is there is a continuous relationship between sodium intake and blood pressure. The more sodium you eat, the higher your blood pressure is likely to be raised. And some people are even more sensitive to the blood pressure raising effects of sodium. If you already have hypertension, high blood pressure that is, or diabetes, kidney disease, if you are over 50 or if you are of African descent, sodium will raise your blood pressure even more. On the other hand, even in those with normal blood pressure, a reduced salt intake can reduce the risk of developing hypertension. So what's the big deal? Well, high blood pressure is considered a disease of global significance. Hypertension is serious in that it can cause many health problems, and yet it is largely preventable. So hypertension in itself is a preventable condition, but once a person has hypertension, that does increase their risk of having kidney disease, heart disease, stroke, and other problems. And that is why reducing sodium and reducing hypertension are two of the 9 global targets by member countries of the United Nations. There are various countries in the United Nations who are working together to tackle what's called NCDs, non-contagious or non-communicable diseases. And just by the way, some of the other 7 global targets for reducing chronic disease or non-communicable disease include reducing tobacco, reducing alcohol, and reducing physical inactivity. So if after this webinar, if you are inspired to reduce your sodium intake, you will be joined by millions of people around the world. Let's look at the definition of normal blood pressure versus pre-hypertension versus hypertension. A normal blood pressure is less than 120/80. So if you know your blood pressure, if you're in that range, you can be feeling confident about that. A pre-hypertension is between 120 to 139/80 to 89. And hypertension is when your systolic blood pressure is 140/diastolic 90 and beyond. If you have diabetes, you're certainly invited to aim for normal blood pressure, but your doctor will be maybe giving you a slightly more liberal target, as low as high as up to under 130, over 90. These guidelines come from the clinical practice recommendations released in 2013. Each of you has to know your own targets for blood pressure control. Discuss that with your physician, but these would be the guidelines that are provided by scientists at the Canadian Diabetes Association. And remarkably, hypertension is the leading cause of death around the world. This is, to me, something really quite remarkable, and this was one of the many facts that I found so stunning as I prepared for this lecture. So I think I'll just let you look at this slide for a moment and really let that sink in, that hypertension is indeed a very common and very hazardous health condition. To be specific, up to 40% of adults have hypertension around the world, and so countries are working together and working within their own countries to tackle this huge problem. For one thing, World Health Day, which is organized by the World Health Organization, features a special health concern every year, and last year their concern, what they were featuring, was hypertension. We also have the World Hypertension Day every day on May 17th, which is organized by the World Hypertension League. This league works together on several fronts to improve screening, education, and treatment. There is also the World Action on Salt and Health Organization, simply known as WASH. Perhaps that's because we are awash in salt, but at any rate, WASH is an organization of 95 countries working together to encourage governments and food manufacturers to reduce sodium in our food supply. World Salt Awareness Week is happening as we speak, so this is a very topical webinar to be tuning into. This organization is in the middle of a 5-year campaign to help consumers ask for less salt, look for lower salt options, and most importantly, choose them. This is the current poster that they're using to promote their World Action on Salt, and they have a poster and other materials released every year. Here in Canada, we had a group of scientists, food manufacturers, and policymakers called the Sodium Working Group. They were a government-approved body that was active from 2008 to 2010. During their existence, the working group established an interim goal, so an initial goal, for Canadians to reduce their sodium intake to 2,300 milligrams, hoping to meet that target by 2016, with an ultimate goal that for most people, they would be less than 2,300 milligrams. After they released this report, they were disbanded, which led some people to think that the government was siding with food manufacturers who were concerned that the sodium targets were too low, that consumers would not be on board with eating lower sodium foods, and that it would be too difficult to reformulate so many food products. Others were concerned that with the group's demise, there would be no proper monitoring to see if the targets were being met or if food manufacturers were indeed dropping the sodium as they promised. So nowadays, according to the Health Canada website, The government would like Canadians to try to get their sodium down to 2,300 milligrams, but this is going to be a challenge as sodium reduction by food manufacturers is only on a voluntary basis. And the labeling laws that we are going to examine in a minute are working with a sodium level of 2,300 milligrams. So that'll make a bit more sense as we go. In Canada, we have many health organizations providing consumers with tips, recipes, and ideas about how to reduce sodium. There are indeed many good things we can do, but until packaged food and restaurant food is lower in sodium, it's going to be difficult to meet that 2,300 milligram, let alone less than that. At any rate, in addition to what I will tell you later, you have resources from all of these organizations at hand. They have written materials, they have extensive websites, so there's really no shortage of tips and ideas of how to cut down on sodium in our diet if a person were wanting to do that. The Canadian Diabetes Association has 2 web pages of interest. You might like to check those out later. I'd also like to talk about some other Canadian efforts to bring awareness to the sodium issue. There was last year's Revealing Marketplace television show on how high many Canadian food products are in sodium. And if you like, you can go to the online Big Life Sodium Calculator to get an estimate of how much sodium you are eating. I personally enjoy reading articles by the Centre for Science in the Public Interest. They have a website and a newsletter that really doesn't pull any punches about what's in our food. They are also vocal critics of the processed foods that get in the way of our health. Closer to home, I'm in BC, so closer to my home anyhow, is British Columbia government efforts called, one of their efforts is through Healthy Families BC, a program which supports a healthy lifestyle on many fronts. The program includes lots of online material on a number of topics, but they are also taking a real feature for sodium reduction. This is one of the posters that you might see around town in your doctor's office or at your community center, which is bringing awareness to sodium in the foods that we might add it to. There's another one on that all salts have the same amount of sodium, such as sea salt or various flavored salts. So they have a number of posters that are trying to help us appreciate where sodium is coming from in our diet. The website also has a sodium sense game where you can build meals, click and drag on food, put it onto a plate, and try to keep within 2,300 milligram or 1,500 milligram limits. Healthy Families is also behind a dining program we will talk about next. We also have here BC Health Files, which are online and in print, and you can email or speak to a registered dietitian through 811. To access a dietitian 5 days a week, just 811, and this person is at your service, or email. The Informed Dining campaign I just mentioned is a voluntary program whereby restaurants not only provide nutrition information, but they also must show the daily calorie and sodium requirements so diners can compare what they are eating with their needs. There is also a little contest on right now that can net you maybe $100. So if you go to the website for Informed Dining, you'll be able to enter that contest if you like. I like the aspect of the Informed Dining which requires the menu to also inform the consumer how much sodium and calories is their daily limit. It's really important to know, okay, this has 500 milligrams of sodium, but what does that mean to me personally? So that's an added bonus, I think, in this program, in that they do have to let consumers know for their age what is a limit for their sodium. These are some of the participating restaurants, and most of these are big chains. It does take money to do the nutrition analysis of all your menu items so that you can provide the menu information to consumers. There are smaller establishments also coming on board, but it does take time. What I'm interested in is that the BC government, which must have all kinds of priorities, but they are making noise about sodium reduction, because according to something I read on their website, reducing sodium could prevent up to almost 24,000 heart attack events, heart attack and stroke per year, which could save our province $1.4 billion. So indeed, less sodium could translate into healthier people. I really do enjoy bringing to you, however, what the critics are saying about these kinds of initiatives. I do believe their concerns are valid. In a study at Yale University, the researchers found that these brochures, nutrition brochures, may indeed exist. They may be there for you to pick them up and look at them, but in their study, only 0.1% of customers actually read these brochures. In a Cornell University study, attendees to so-called healthier restaurants tended to order other higher calorie things on the side, probably because they thought, well, I'm eating this healthy thing, so therefore I can have this, say, not so healthy thing. I call that the diet pop syndrome, where you might say, well, I'm going to get a Diet Coke, therefore I can get the large fries. And you think it all kind of balances out, but I don't think it does. I have also noticed at Subway that they really promote themselves as being healthy, but they do sure want to sell you the bag of chips or the juice or something with your sandwich. So the health only goes so far, and you have to be a very savvy consumer and not get dragged into the marketing. I also really like the quotation here from Yoni Friedhoff, who is an obesity expert, and he says, the government should instead be encouraging the transformation of raw ingredients at home, otherwise known as cooking. And yes, cooking, perhaps that will make a comeback one day. We sure like to watch cooking on TV. Ultimately, it's cooking at home that is going to be dropping our sodium significantly, because most of the sodium we eat comes from restaurant and takeout and processed foods. So now it's your turn. If you are a free living adult, then reducing sodium is ultimately up to you. If you need to decide if sodium is a concern to you, and if it is, stay with me now to read some food labels, talk about cookbooks, and learn how to analyze your own recipes while learning how to also eat out more healthfully. And if you do think that you will be making a significant change in how much sodium you eat, and if you're taking blood pressure medication, let your doctor know that you are going to be changing your diet, because that may require a smaller amount of medication. This is a nutrition facts table from a box of cereal. Let's point out a few key things about the nutrition facts. The one good thing about processed foods is that they all come with a label. Many people have said if it has a label at all, you shouldn't be eating it. I disagree with that. I would like to say we can choose foods wisely by reading labels. Here in this item, there's a few items I want to pick out in this cereal. For one thing is the serving size, 1 cup. The sodium here is 270 milligrams. And next to that you see 11%. The 11% you see is called percent daily value. The daily value for sodium, as we've talked about the upper limit, which is 2,300 milligrams, and more than 2,300 milligrams is considered now to be getting out of a safe limit for sodium. the government is using 2,300 milligrams as our daily limit. So that's why 270 out of 2,300 is 11%. So that's what that number is coming from. That's where that number is coming from. If the percent daily value was based on our requirements, which are 1,500 milligrams of sodium, the percent daily value would be 18%. Why I'm mentioning this is that the percent daily value may not apply to you personally. If you're trying to keep your sodium less than 2,300, then comparing this food to 2,300 is going to make that percent daily value higher than what you actually want for yourself, or lower, I should say. You also need to be aware of the serving size. If you are eating more than what the portion says on the package, you're getting more of everything. And that's why I really applaud the United States, which is about to embark on some worthy changes to their nutrition facts, including making these serving sizes more realistic. Yes, a half a cup of ice cream might be some amount of calories and fat and whatnot, but nobody in their right mind eats half a cup of ice cream, and I think we all pretend that we're eating less than we actually are. So that will be a good change for nutrition facts. At any rate, start looking at the labels, and you'll be amazed at how high some foods are in sodium. You know, it doesn't matter that I've been a dietitian for over 20 years. I am continually amazed by what I find is in foods. I was in a restaurant lately, and I found out later on that one of their menu items had 5,000 milligrams of sodium in it. I mean, 5,000. That could hardly comprehend it. It must be crunchy with salt. I don't know, but this is how some of our foods are. That would certainly be one of the worst offenders going, but I'd like you to meet the other worst offenders, and they are called the Salty Six. This poster is brought to you by the American Heart Association, and they're also a good website to check out. These 6 food categories contribute most to our daily sodium intake. So have a look at this poster for a minute and think about the ones that you enjoy. Bread and bread products can be very high in themselves, and they contribute a lot of sodium because we eat a lot of them. It's easy to have 2 to 4 slices of bread in a day, and you might have a muffin for a coffee break, and that puts you at 1,100 milligrams. I was surprised to see how high a bagel was, and also how high cream cheese was. And note that these foods are from restaurants. You can make your own baked goods with less salt. I will tell you, however, that I wrote a cookbook lately with a very experienced cookbook writer. She's got 6 or 7 cookbooks to her name, and she created menus for our book that contained a maximum of 1,600 milligrams for a day's menu. She really had to work so hard to create lower sodium baked goods. It just about killed her, because you need salt in baked goods, you need leavening agents like baking powder and baking soda, and these things all contain sodium. But she did manage it. She turned out really nice products, but it's a different way of looking at baking, and you might have a few errors along the way as you gradually reduce the sodium in your baked products. Certainly, it's a worthy task, though, because these muffins and bagels and tea biscuit are from one of our favorite muffin stores, and I'm sure we could bake those more healthfully at home. Note, too, muffins that we're making at home are not going to be that jumbo size, so right now they're going to have less sodium. It's no surprise that the other members of the Salty Six are there. I mean, bread's a little bit of a surprise that it's so very high in sodium, but the other ones are pretty obvious offenders. I think we would know that. These things taste salty: cold cuts, hot dogs, bacon, and of course sandwiches, which are that delicious combination of bread and cold cuts and cheese. And so these things put together can just about meet our acceptable intake for sodium in one mere meal. What's also interesting about salt is We love salt, but we learn to love it. Babies automatically like sweet. That's an innate driving force to enjoy the taste of something sweet. But salt we learn, and over time we learn to like it more. The more we eat of salt, the better we like it. So we need to expect it's going to take time to adjust if we are trying to cut back on sodium. Also, I didn't even dare tell you the portions for these cold cuts, because these are only an ounce or 2 ounces, which is not that much, and they're still this high in sodium. If we have bigger servings, which is what we'd like to do, the sodium is off the charts. Soup is also legendary. It's probably the most famous offender. I think we all are very well aware that soup is very high in sodium. And even lower sodium can be 400 or 500 milligrams of sodium compared to the regular ones, canned soups that are 700 to 900 milligrams. Pizza is another one. Cheese, it's got olives, it's got pepperoni. The dough itself has salt in it. So it's a challenge indeed. So instead of salty 6, how about we make a dash towards better health? The DASH diet is a pretty famous diet now. It's been around for quite a few years. The long name is Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. It is called the DASH diet, and yet, you know, it's really not that different from Canada's food guide or any other sensible way of eating. It's got lots of vegetables and fruit. It's got whole grains, which we need, low-fat dairy, lean protein, and really, as I say, it's not all that different from what kind of advice you might receive at any half-decent health professional's office. Because it's things that are made at home, however, it is going to be less sodium. And following the DASH diet can drop the systolic blood pressure by about 5 millimeters of mercury and the diastolic by 2 millimeters of mercury, and it can be as effective or more effective than blood pressure lowering pills. And since to get one's blood pressure down to target can often take 2 or 3 different types of blood pressure lowering agents, it'd be really worthwhile to try to incorporate some elements of the DASH diet so as to not need quite so many tablets. This DASH diet is not only low in sodium, but it's high in nutrients that can help counteract high blood pressure, especially nutrients like potassium, maybe calcium. Plus, because people tend to lose weight on this healthy way of eating, that can aid one's blood pressure. And there's research that suggests if you're trying to reduce your risk of getting to diabetes, a DASH diet can be part of your strategy. So here are a few other items you can compare, all kinds of things we have in our kitchen cupboards. And the point of this slide is to show you that really food coming out of the ground or out of the cow is pretty low in sodium. It's when we manipulate it by our factories in particular that the sodium is off the charts. A baked potato has 5 milligrams of sodium. French fries, 555, and that's not necessarily the biggest size of French fries that you can buy out there. Homemade burger, which would have some seasoning in it, meat and an egg, whatever, for about 500 milligrams. Fast food burger is double. The chocolate shake is what really surprised me. And this is, I'm not trying to be too dramatic, but this might represent a kind of diabolical food chemistry whereby food scientists, can determine what's called the sweet spot. And the sweet spot is the place in our brain that is very happy when the right combination of sugar and salt are met. So scientists are putting sometimes sugar in things that don't need to be sugary, but it helps that overall flavor profile, or they're putting salt in things that don't need to be salty because it adds to this kind of sensation that our brain just lights up with delight. I've also noticed a trend to the salty salted caramel chocolate, salted caramel macchiato. I think I saw salted ice cream. Putting salt on things that really we didn't used to put salt on before. So it's obviously not a good trend, but these things taste really good. Our brain is easily tricked into liking these kinds of things. So my point here is really cooking at home can provide you with much less sodium. And once you have things from a food factory, you're going to be having a challenge to keep your sodium down. So what can you really do? You know, you may not want to do all of these things. You may want to do one of these things. I think it's apparent that I've said cook at home. If you can't have all your meals at home, having more often eating at home, it is a challenge to, buy groceries and cook and clean. It's an effort, but it is a very worthy effort. If you are doing home cooking, there are oodles of healthy cookbooks. There are simply no end to healthy recipes online. And now that you realize that you're trying to minimize your sodium to this somewhere between 15 to 2,300 milligrams level, you can use that as a benchmark for looking at the nutrition information that's provided in your in whatever cookbook or recipe you're using. And when you do cook, the good news is you can add some salt. The salt we add at home is still nothing compared to what would be added by the food manufacturer. Don't go overboard. What that means is try to taste the actual food rather than just taste the salt. And use seasonings other than salt. If you've got a recipe of your own and you want to know how much sodium is in it, you can analyze it online. There are many free websites for this, including one on the Dietitians of Canada website. They have a recipe analyzer, and there are others as well. They're not hard to use once you get the hang of it. And if you must eat out, use the nutrition information that is provided, and actually use it. In New York City, they are really kind of trailblazers in improving nutrition for their citizens. They were definitely among the first to say we've got to stop selling these huge pops, these huge supersized drinks. They're trying to make those basically illegal to sell. And in New York City, I am told that if you were to go to a fast food restaurant, the calories and whatnot are posted up on the menu where you're looking to place your order. So it's a little harder to ignore the fact. It's pretty easy to not pick up that nutrition brochure. But if the calories are posted right next to what you are ordering, it's really helpful for making better choices. Now, also choosing simply smaller portions when you eat out. We have been told this so many times, not to supersize, but we do get drawn into the economy idea behind these food marketers know what they're doing. I'd also like to suggest that you watch out for snack foods. Having fruit, vegetables, homemade muffins, yogurt, unsalted nuts are all good options. And if you do have to buy salty snacks, or you really enjoy salty snacks, buy small bags, no larger than 30 grams in the bag, or take a portion out of a larger bag. Now, actually, who does that? I don't know. I think most people just open the bag and eat it till it's gone. That is normal eating behavior for most humans. It's what we do. But, if you can buy smaller portions to start off with, that's going to save you. And my favorite is always eat slowly to savor your food. And that helps you eat the amount that is satisfying rather than just eating the whole bag because it's kind of automatic. And, just don't do it to yourself at the movies. Don't buy the huge bag of popcorn. You can also look at your nutrition facts, having the idea of what you're going for. Start to compare between products. You may like to look for foods that are less than 200 milligrams of sodium. That's a kind of a benchmark that's often recommended. Or looking for foods that are less than 5% daily value. That's often recommended as a quick and easy way to decide if this is a lower sodium food. Watch out for instant foods, which people with diabetes know this anyway. They know that things that you just add hot water and they're cooked are the kinds of things that are liable to spike their blood sugar. So avoiding instant stuff, that will help reduce the sodium. The more processed, the more sodium there will be. Watch out for sauces. We love our, our teriyaki and our HP sauce and our soy sauce. You can use those. There will be lower sodium varieties out there, and look at the label and use a teaspoon rather than a tablespoon perhaps. If you're using canned products, rinse off the water that they're sitting in. That rinses off a lot of the sodium. And as I've mentioned, do actually pick up and open the nutrition brochures. And if you're in BC, there are going to be more and more brochures related to restaurant eating. I'm also informed that this dining program will be going national. So whatever province you're in, there'll be more and more opportunities to learn about sodium. The idea is, do we actually act on this information? At any rate, my wrapping up with, accept that it will take your palate time to adjust. And that's okay. We can change gradually, built in a day. The motto of the CDA is small things take time, or good things take time. I forget exactly. I hate to muff it up, but essentially, changes that are made little by little are lasting changes. So, give yourself a chance to appreciate lower sodium foods, and best of luck from me. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Barbara. I have to say that I enjoy the Salty Six. A lot of the items on the Salty Six, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But let's just get straight to questions. So if anyone does have a question for Barbara, you can type it in the Q&A box just on the right-hand side of your screen. And we already have a question from Stephanie, and she's asking, how many teaspoons of salt does 2,300 milligrams represent?
2,300 milligrams is the amount of sodium in 1 teaspoon of salt.
Okay. And how much sodium?
Okay,
I catch up to everything.
Yeah, I wrote that down. I thought somebody might ask that very question. So it is not that bad. A tablespoon is going to give you 159 compared to a teaspoon of soy sauce, which is 500, a tablespoon of HP sauce, 200. So the ketchup's not a catastrophe.
Okay, but I probably shouldn't be adding it to everything.
Well, that's the decision a person has to make. It's there may be that you can cut down in some areas, and then you have your ketchup in where you really need it.
So if someone came to see you, Barbara, what would you say, and they really wanted to reduce their sodium intake? I know you gave us lots of recommendations, but what would you say the top 3 things? If someone was just starting out, I know you mentioned Rome wasn't built in a day. If they were just starting out, what are the sort of top 2 or 3 things you would suggest?
Well, I would say for sure, try to eat all the veggies and fruit that are recommended by Canada's Food Guide, which is quite a challenge, but, men and women generally 7 to 8 servings of vegetables and fruit a day, because right now those things have no sodium, virtually 0, and they're very bulky. They take up space, so they make you full without adding sodium, and they're just super nutritious for you anyway, so I would say try to do that. I would definitely say start to read the nutrition facts on your favorite foods, things that you eat often, things that you're eating every day. Look at your bread, look at your cereal. If you're eating takeout foods, get to know the sodium in those most common foods. And then the third thing would be getting to know your kitchen, your mixing bowls and your flipper, and trying to do some home cooking.
So eating at home is really key to keeping the salt intake down.
Yeah, it is the ultimate answer to getting the sodium down, because food manufacturers will follow the money. If indeed consumers will buy lower sodium products, and sometimes they won't, if they will buy lower sodium products, it's going to take ages to get the sodium that far down that it makes a big difference. Because even things that are sodium reduced are often only 25% less sodium. So if you're looking at a soup that's 1,000 milligrams and well now it's 750, that isn't really that huge of a savings in one's day. So food manufacturers are going to have a very long road to get the sodium down low enough to help us reach our 2,300 milligram upper limit.
Okay, and Gatwal has a question. How would you suggest keeping track of sodium intake in a day?
Okay, I would just do it meal by meal. I would sit down and look at, let's say, we as humans are generally quite repetitive in our eating habits. You know, we don't eat 16 different kinds of breakfasts as a rule. We might eat 4 or 5 different things that we rotate. You know, we might eat 2 or 3 different kinds of cereal. We might eat, go to our favorite takeout restaurant for breakfast, you know, egg McMuffin kind of affair. So I would get to know, first of all, what are my favorite things I eat for breakfast and how much sodium is in those things. Work even just one meal at a time. Say work on breakfast, get to see what are the sodium sources in there. And once you're familiar with that, start to think about alternatives. It may mean having, you know, I might normally have this, you know, let's say bagel and cheese affair at, you know, not to mention any names. Maybe I could switch it out for this other item that's on the menu that I like just as well, but the sodium is going to be that much reduced.
Okay. Would you suggest keeping a journal then?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's helpful for me, and it also a person re-looking up everything all the time. You know, you don't, there are apps for the phone and there are great online sources, but if you're a paper person, write it down once and then it's there for you.
Okay. And Susan wants to know how poultry is one of the salty 6.
I know, that actually surprised me as well. I had to look into that, and I think it's partly because poultry is something that we eat often. It's a bit like the bread story. Even if a slice of bread is not that big of a deal, it's 150 per slice. We eat a lot of bread. We eat it every day. We might eat it 2 or 3 or 4 pieces in a day. So it's an offender in that it's with the frequency that we eat it. And poultry, plain chicken breast, is going to be close to between 0 to 100 milligrams of sodium, just plain, but then it's what we do as preparation. If you're buying the great box of chicken breasts, they're already seasoned. How convenient is that? But the sodium is going to be much, much higher. Or if we like to go to our, you know, fast food and we have the battered, the breaded, seasoned chicken burger, that's where the sodium is going to be going up. So with chicken, it's because we eat it often and we mostly eat it, it's been processed in some way. If we're cooking it at home and we're putting on herbs and spices and just a little bit of salt, it is definitely not going to be an offender.
Okay, because that's usually, I feel I'm having a healthy lunch if I take a plain chicken breast to work with some vegetables. And when I saw that was one of the salty 6, I was surprised too.
Yeah. So indeed, if you are having a chicken breast that you've made at home and you're seasoning it up with, you know, lemon and herbs and spices and maybe a little salt if you need it, that's not going to be a problem whatsoever.
Okay. And you mentioned at the beginning of your discussion that 97% of kids and teens have much more sodium than they need. I was surprised by how large of a number that is. Is it because they're eating a lot of the salty 6?
They are eating what their parents give them, and you know, it's beyond their control what they eat. I mean, maybe when they get to be teenagers, they've got a little income and they're buying pizza or what have you. But it is certainly the salty 6 is part of that because they're eating bread a lot. They love pizza. They love cheese. They love cold cuts. And their bodies also need less sodium because when you're younger, you simply need less sodium, but you're eating high sodium foods. I don't mind admitting that I have pizza pops in my freezer for my kid, and I thought, oh my stars, this is 500 milligrams in one. So your friendly neighborhood dietitian doesn't mind admitting that she has some very high sodium foods in her very own freezer, and I have to take a serious look at this. When it comes to sodium, it is sometimes suggested, and each of us has to make our own list of priorities. It gets challenging to try to do it all. But, you know, you might want to first work on, if you have diabetes, work on your blood sugar, learn about carbohydrates, learn about fiber. Then you might be working on your fats. And then you get down to sodium. You know, you can't do it all at once necessarily. For me, and I think I have a fairly healthy diet, now I'm going to be looking at the sodium, though, more carefully, as I do believe I've got the fiber covered. I think I'm eating enough protein. I've got the dairy covered for sure. I feel ready to take on the sodium.
And what about carbs? I know it seems like in a lot of diets, people are talking about cutting out carbs. Is it all in moderation, or would you ever suggest to cut out carbs completely?
Well, you know, I really like to support whatever my clients want. If they want to try a lower carb lifestyle, I would want to help them do that safely, depending on what kind of medication they're on or whatever various aspects they have of their lifestyle. Carbohydrates are not the enemy in diabetes, however, and that's been proven time and time and time and time again with our most recent clinical practice guidelines, examining all the evidence for weight loss and for blood sugar control. Carbohydrates are still perfectly fine for diabetes. Yes, you want to eat the healthy choices, the low glycemic choices, the whole grains, the nugget potatoes, eating the skins of fruits rather than fruit juice. There's absolutely nothing wrong with carbohydrates. It is moderation, however. But, you know, that's normal eating. A balanced diet is not just rice on your plate. It includes other foods on your plate. It looks better, it tastes better to have a variety of different things at one meal and not sit down to just a plate of spaghetti.
Exactly, and you need some variety, right, to keep it interesting.
Right.
So Gloria's asking, some people reduced their salt intake too much. So I think it is very important to know what the symptoms of lack of salt are.
Well, you know, I would suggest that, I like this comment because whenever I'm making these suggestions, you know, cut down on this or that or eat more of that, I just think to myself, there's some teeny tiny elderly lady out there who is now going to cut out salt and she's going to lose weight because nothing tastes good to her. And I'm terribly concerned that that does not happen. You know, we want to make changes in our diet, but we still need to maintain a healthy body weight and a healthy way of eating. When it comes to cutting down on sodium too much, well, I haven't met anyone to whom that has happened. I think that would be quite a struggle to cut down too much because the all we need as a minimum is 500 milligrams per day. And I would be shocked that any human could cut down to that low while living in our normal society. I mean, there is one tribe of Brazilian indigenous people, it was estimated that they only ate 200 milligrams of sodium a day, and yet they were thriving. So, you know, I think if you cut down drastically, you know, from one to another, from a high sodium to a lower sodium diet, chances are there could be some symptoms. A person might have a big reduction in their blood pressure, or they might just quit eating because food tastes so different. So it might taste awfully bland, and that could be, obviously that would be a problem. I guess for me, the obvious symptom of not having enough salt might be one's blood pressure is suddenly lower, and you might feel dizzy. And so indeed, that's why I mentioned if you have high blood pressure and you're taking medication for it, you'd need to let your doctor know that you're changing your diet because your medication may indeed need to be adjusted.
Okay. And I just wanted to let the participants know, if you do have a question, of course, type it in the Q&A pod, because I'm a chatty Cathy, and I'll just keep asking Barbara my own questions. So I hope I'm asking questions that everyone is thinking, but maybe they're just not typing. But if you do have a question, feel free to type it in just in the Q&A pod, and I will get to it right away. Barbara, do you think food manufacturers will start to feel the pressure to reduce sodium, or do you think until that pressure is put on by government or policymakers, they'll just keep doing what they're doing?
Yeah, the critics, the scientists who disagree with this voluntary allowing food manufacturers voluntarily to lower their sodium, they say that 40 years of encouraging food manufacturers to reduce the sodium has not been effective. So they want to see a bill, they want to see a mandate that's handed down by the government that, yes, you have to cut your sodium by X amount. Because, you know, it is a lot of trouble to reformulate a product, taste panels, and thousands of dollars or millions of dollars to reformulate a product and then market it and have a new nutrition facts label and get people to buy into it. So it's going to take approaches from both sides. We as consumers need to phone up our favorite bread maker and say, you know, we love your bread, but could you make it less salty? It's just so high in sodium. Can you do something about that? And also talk to your government. Say, we think that you should be encouraging food manufacturers to make lower sodium foods. And then we have to buy these things too, because if I remember correctly, there was some lower sodium soups made by Campbell's, but they were not bought. The consumers did not go for it, so they quit making them.
Really? Wow. And I was just at Trader Joe's over the weekend, actually, and I've noticed it's very trendy now in some of the products to be reduced sodium, low sodium. Hopefully that trend will continue.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Hannah. She would like to know, what about using seasonings that have potassium chloride instead of salt? No salt or half salt products.
Yeah, you know, unless you have, if you have kidney troubles and you're on a potassium restriction, those would not be safe, but a person would definitely know that. If you had kidney troubles, you would have been met with it. You would have met with a dietitian, and you would know that those are not safe substitutes to use. You can use those things like no salt or half salt. They are indeed potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride. Joanna Burkhardt, in the book I wrote with her, she said, you know, yes, those are out there, but they really don't take away the craving that we've grown into having for salt. Maybe we should try instead to crave the taste of lemon or basil or pepper and not be going for the salty hit that our brain has come to love.
But it's true about those cravings. Like sometimes you just feel like a bag of chips.
Yeah, you really do. It's there is quite a bit of research going into food addiction and the role that the brain plays in causing us to eat things. We're not weak-willed or lacking willpower. There really is a chemistry and a science behind our food choices. It's marketing, it's our brain, it's food chemistry that makes us, it drives us to eat things that are not healthy. And I'm not trying to absolve us of guilt, but simply to say, you know, our food choices are very much affected by our environment.
In what way? Like in sort of the situations that we put ourselves in, if we choose to go out to restaurants and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's that. It's also what's available. There are the hundreds of thousands of foods in the grocery store, and most of those are manufactured foods, and there's a new one every day. The marketing is off the charts. I mean, the commercials that we see, so much money is spent on food advertising and very little spent on advertising healthy foods. You know, how many Apple commercials did you see yesterday? So those kind of environmental things in the bigger picture. And then, you know, internally within our own bodies, we are sensitive to food chemistry, that food chemists, bless their heart, are very able to construct a food that just turns our brain on, lights it up. We love the way this tastes because it's a magic combo of sugar and salt and other additives, and we sometimes just can't get enough of it.
And Hannah would like to know, do you think the use of sea salt without iodine may become an issue for Canadians?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, number one, using salt in cooking at home is not a big deal because it's nothing like the salt that we'd be getting in processed foods. So if you want to cook with salt, go ahead. Certainly when it comes to iodine, not only are the world authorities on sodium and hypertension saying, let's cut down our sodium, but they're saying, but let's make sure if we are using salt that we do use iodized salt, because we do need iodine, and that is a key way to get salt, get iodine into the diet of humans is through iodizing salt. So they're pro-iodizing salt, but let's cut the overall amount. And you know, I mean, my own mother had a goiter because she lived in an area of low iodine. So it's really true. Now, she lived in England, and I don't know the iodine amounts in the soils and whatnot across Canada, but I think if you're going to use salt, use iodized salt because we need that compound.
And I know you touched on salt substitutes a couple moments ago, but Janet wants to know yes or no. Like, would you go with them, I think, as an absolute rule for salt substitutes?
I'm going to say ultimately no, because they don't train you to stop wanting salt.
You'll still get that craving.
Yeah.
Okay. And earlier you talked about New York really being a trailblazer in putting the dietary components of their menu items right on the menu. Would you like to see BC go in that direction?
Oh yeah, I totally would. Why not, right? I mean, there is, I forget the statistic exactly, but it's quite a large proportion of our daily spending is spent on restaurants, and that's not going to change soon. So the more information we can have when we are eating in restaurants, the better.
And I guess it really would be a deterrent to have that piece of chocolate lava cake or that item that you were talking about that had like something like, what was it, 5,000 milligrams of salt?
Yeah, and I'm not trying to be a downer, because anyone who knows me knows that I love chocolate and I really recommend everything in moderation. I really, really do. But there are some foods that are just so zany, they did not need to be invented, and we need to protect people from these things, especially parents who might be getting this stuff for their children. There are sadly lots of people who are not listening to this webinar who are lacking in knowledge.
So I guess for parents, staying away from the frozen pizzas and the prepackaged meals would be a good place to start.
Yes, it really would, and alongside with the whole movement towards the family meal, recapturing the family meal, the value of the family meal, people eating together, that, you know, teenagers not sitting in his room with a frozen pizza and the other teenagers downstairs in the, you know, rec room with her frozen whatever. It's that everyone comes together, everyone cooks together, they sit down together, they turn off their devices, they share how their day was. A lot of research about keeping families healthy, keeping teenagers out of drugs and alcohol and even early sexual activity and mental health issues by eating as a family.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad how that's becoming a thing of the past with people's schedules. Everyone's busy. People have their iPad on the table or their phone on the table, and I think that's a really good point, that the family dinner is a great place to have healthy meals and make that happen.
Right.
So Sue wants to know, is there a higher sodium content in dark versus white or milk chocolate?
Ooh. The good news is chocolate is not a sodium issue. So, you know, I'll tell you what, I'm going to look up chocolate here as we speak, and I will be happy to inform you that, let's have a look here. How about, oh, I don't know, you like chocolate, so dark chocolate. Either way, chocolate is not a big source of sodium. Just look into my chart, 7 milligrams, 100 milligrams, 5 milligrams. Definitely not a big contributor to our diet. So that's the happy news for my webinar today.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So we can enjoy our chocolate, in moderation, of course.
For sure.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to throw out the request for anyone that has a lingering question for Barbara. Type it away in the Q&A pod just on the right-hand side of your screen. But Barbara, if you had sort of a parting comment for the participants in this webinar, or something that they should sort of take away from this presentation, what would it be?
My takeaway is that sodium is really high in the foods that we've come to eat on a daily basis. We have had no idea how much salt we're eating, and now we've got to take some knowledge. We've got to use our knowledge to become aware of what we're eating and make gradual changes.
Okay. Well, I know I'm inspired to actually read labels, because I admittedly never do that. I try to eat a healthy, balanced diet, but I truly never look at the label on my soup or the label on clearly my ketchup bottle.
Right.
So I definitely will be doing that after this presentation. So thank you so much for the inspiration for that. Yeah. And I just also wanted to say thank you so much to all of the participants who attended the webinar tonight, and for all of the wonderful volunteers who coordinated this session. You don't see them, but there's an army of people who are dedicated to making these webinars happen. And we would also like to remind everyone that you will be sent an evaluation survey tomorrow, and of course we encourage you to complete it. This survey should only take 2 minutes and provides valuable input for our association. And the spring webinar series is generously supported by Lilly. The development and delivery of impactful programs such as our Canadian Diabetes webinar series is made possible through generous support of our donors. If you enjoyed the Salt with a Deadly Weapon webinar and would like to make a donation, please visit our website at diabetes.ca or call 1-800-BANTING. Thank you so much, everyone, for your support and for participating in tonight's webinar. Have a lovely evening. Barbara, thank you so much as well.
Thank